Hello and welcome to Mastering IELTS Speaking, the Express course. I'd like to say a warm welcome back to any students who took my IELTS writing courses, and I'd like to say hello to any students who may be new to my courses. It's really great. And 9. Now, because I have spent years now exclusively focusing on IELTS in my lessons, I have learned about the most common mistakes which students make in the speaking. Skype lessons to learn about these mistakes and to learn about these strategies. But thanks to Udemy, I'm able to condense all of that information into a 20 lecture course that you can take advantage of. So, who is this course for? This course is for anybody who's aiming to achieve a Band 7 or above in IELTS speaking. If you're aiming to achieve 6.5 or even a 6, this course could still be very useful for you, but some of the content may be a little bit challenging at times. The course is structured into 5 sections designed to address each part of the speaking test, and that aims to help you to produce confident, accurate answers by focusing on specific band descriptor requirements. The course works because it addresses the most common difficulties encountered when responding to IELTS speaking questions. As I said, I've learnt about these through my years of working with students. It offers a number of clear strategies for tackling the different parts of the speaking test and overcoming these difficulties. And it also gives you a foundation for practice moving forward with your study. So, how is the course structured? Well, right now we're in section 1, which is a general introduction to the course and to the speaking test. So in this lecture here, we're just covering what the course involves, what the structure of the course is, and what are the course aims. In the next lecture, we're going to look at an overview of the entire IELTS exam. And if you feel comfortable with the IELTS exam, if you feel confident with how it's structured and how it's arranged, then you may want to skip this lecture. and pronunciation. In section 2, we'll look at the first part of the speaking test, which is called the interview stage. Now, each of the lectures inside section 2, section 3 and section 4 are going to focus on a specific band descriptor category. So the first lecture in section 2 is going to focus on fluency and coherence. Looking at grammatical range and accuracy and accurately identifying the question in order to answer in a grammatically accurate way. And finally, with pronunciation, we're going to look at recognizing our weaknesses with a specific focus on individual sounds within words. In section 3, we're going to look at part 2, which is called the long turn, or you may know it as the 2-minute talk. With the areas that we're going to cover, if we think about fluency and coherence first, we're going to look at the idea of segmenting. Common mistakes that are made in terms of vocabulary, and it's going to be a similar story in the next lecture for grammatical range and accuracy, where we'll focus on the most common grammar mistakes and how we can avoid making these mistakes ourselves. In pronunciation, we're going to focus on syllable stress and why that's such an important part of your pronunciation. Now, the final part of the speaking exam is part 3. This is called the discussion stage, and we'll look at this in section 4. The areas that we're going to cover are, first of all, discourse markers and listing, and this will have a big impact on your fluency. And how that has a big impact on whether you pronounce the English language correctly. Okay, the final section in this course is going to focus on a conclusion. Struggle to get the score they need. They have the ability, but on exam day, everything comes away. So we'll look at how to handle that. We'll look at getting guidance. Speaking is an active activity. It's not passive. You produce your words. You don't take them in. So it's very for part 1, for part 2, and for part 3. So you can see exactly what a top scoring answer looks like in the speaking exam. Now, I want to clarify exactly what this course is, but also what it is not, because I don't want people getting the wrong idea about what this course will contain. So let's start by looking at what the course is not. The course is not a vocabulary booster. There are a number of other Udemy courses which aim to provide you with new vocabulary in specific topics. This is not one of those courses, so don't come into this course expecting to dramatically improve your vocabulary. We will look at new vocabulary, but it will come up organically. As their main intention. This course is not a pronunciation coach. Same thing, there are other courses on Udemy which will help you in this regard. I'm hoping, again, that we will improve your pronunciation as a byproduct of taking this course, but we're not going to focus on improving every aspect of your pronunciation. So what is this course exactly? This course is a 20-lecture crash course on how to improve your IELTS speaking score as soon as possible by highlighting a number of helpful strategies you can use and revealing the most common mistakes that students make. My recommendation is that you try to complete this course within 2 weeks. It's called an express course for a reason. If your exam is coming up soon, this is the course to take. If your exam is coming up a long time from now, this is still the course to take, but you can take your time with it a little bit more, particularly if you have responsibilities. To make the most of this course, you should do a number of things. First of all, bring a focused and committed attitude to every lecture. Don't just sit there passively absorbing the information. Do take notes as you listen to what I'm saying. Make sure you continue to practice alone by answering and recording IELTS speaking questions frequently. Make sure you try to listen to at least 2 podcasts or educational YouTube videos in English every day. It's not enough to go on YouTube and watch cat videos, amusing as they are. They are not going to help your English. But if you watch things like TED Ed, even the TED videos themselves, the School of Life, and podcasts which are educational in particular, this is going to have a big impact on your pronunciation and on your vocabulary. And in some aspects on your grammar as well, absorbing that language. You should find can practice with somebody who wants to learn your language. There are other websites you can focus on, Verbal Planet and italki and websites like these, but it's really important, particularly for the speaking, that you find someone with whom you can practice. Finally, try to enjoy the process. You know, some of the questions that you get in IELTS are quite silly in a way. Some of them are very interesting. They really make us think. And if we approach the course with the intention of trying to enjoy it instead of just take something out of it in terms of our score, then the process will be much more painless and we may absorb a lot more as a result. You can email me at matt@theieltsteacher.com. You can find my Facebook, facebook.com/theieltsteacher. Same for Twitter. And of course, I've spoken about my website where you can learn about what I do, which is www.theieltsteacher.com. Okay, that's it for lecture 1. I look forward to getting started with you on this journey to improving your IELTS speaking, and I will see you in lecture 2. We're going to look at how the IELTS exam is structured overall in this lecture. If that's something that you already feel quite comfortable about, if you've taken IELTS before, or if you've watched one of my earlier videos on this, then feel free to skip this lecture. For those who do not feel comfortable with how the exam is structured, if you feel like you need a little bit more guidance in this area, this lecture aims to provide you with that. Let's start by thinking about what IELTS is exactly. Well, IELTS stands for the International English Language Testing System. That comes together to create IELTS. Notice it is not IELTS and never has been IELTS, so don't pronounce it like that or write it like that. It is the world's most popular English language proficiency test, and over 2 million tests are taken per year, and this is a number which continues to grow year on year. It assesses all our English skills: listening, reading, writing and speaking, which we're going to look at in this course. And it is accepted by schools and universities and employers and immigration authorities in English-speaking countries around the world. Let's have a look at a walkthrough. So, there's quite a lot of information on this page, but let's look at some of the basic things here. First of all, IELTS is split into two modules. You have your academic module and your general training module. You select which module you're going to do based on what your requirements are. You should check this with your industry, with your employer, with your institution before going through with the choice. Your academic module is usually for applying for universities or trying to get an academic career, whereas your general training module, that's often more for general visa applications or non-academic careers in an English-speaking country. But as I say, make sure you find out which module you need. Regardless of which module you choose, every IELTS exam is split into 4 components: listening, reading, writing and speaking. I recommend that you pause the video here just to have a look through this table. The table should give you a clear enough indication of how this exam is structured, but if you do have any questions after having read this through, then do let me know. We're going to focus on the speaking part, so let's have a look at that together. So the time that you are given for the speaking exam ranges, depending on your examiner and the questions you get, between 11 and 14 minutes. And this time is split into 3 parts with no set number of questions. Part 1 is called the interview. This takes around 4 to 5 minutes or 3 to 4 minutes. Part 2 is called the long turn or the talk, and this can take about 3 or 4 minutes. And part 3 is called the discussion, and this again takes about 3 or 4 to 5 minutes. They're roughly about the same length for each part of the test here. Don't worry about each individual part. You'll notice that the academic and the general training modules are quite different, but you don't really need to worry about this when it comes to the speaking. The differences are in the reading test and the writing test. Again, you can have a look at this on this page now. We're not going to go through it now because we're focusing on the speaking exam overall, but it is worth bearing in mind the differences between those two modules. If we think about how IELTS is scored, the first thing to mention is that there is no pass or fail in IELTS. You're graded in each component, and the average of those components combined gives you your overall score. So for example, if you get a 6 in the listening, and then a 7 in the reading, a 6 in the writing, and then a 7 in the speaking, your overall band score will be 6.5. If your band score lands at a 0.25 or a 0.75, your score will be rounded up to the next half band. So if it's a 0.25, you'll go up to 0.5. And if you're at a 0.75, you'll go up to the next full band. Remember that IELTS scores are valid for 2 years after certification, so don't dawdle when it comes to applying to your respective industries. If you know your CEFR score, you can check that out against the roughly average band score for IELTS on the left there. So we're looking at band 7 here. That generally indicates a CEFR score of C1. Finally, if we think about the score requirements for IELTS, if you want to get into university and do a foundation course, you generally need around about a 5.5 to 6. In order to gain access to a bachelor's degree course, you're looking for more of a band 6 to 6.5. It'll be a 6.5 to a 7 for entry to a master's degree course. And anything that's band 7 or above is typically required to work in English-speaking countries in professions such as medicine and law and accounting and academic research. It's important to stress here that you need to check with each employer or university or immigration office exactly what score you need, as different places will require different scores. Okay, hopefully that gave you a decent breakdown of the IELTS exam. Now we can look at the speaking component in a bit more detail in the next lecture. Having looked at the IELTS exam as a whole, in this lecture we're just going to focus on the speaking component of the exam in depth. So let's get started by looking at some key points that you need to know. First of all, as we know, the speaking part comes last in the exam, usually following the writing exam, and it's broken up into 3 different parts. The exam altogether, the speaking component altogether, will take around 11 to 14 minutes. Part 1 will be around 4 to 5 minutes, Part 2 around 3 to 4 minutes, and Part 3 about 4 to 5 minutes, like Part 1. You will speak to a real life person, not a machine, like in other exams like TOEFL and so forth. And you will be told when the test begins, so you don't need to worry about being examined from the moment you walk in to the room with the examiner. You will be told once you are being judged. And the test will be recorded as well. They will tell you this on the day. This is more for training purposes, but also in case you want your exam to be remarked. So part 1 is called the interview stage, and this part of the exam is where the examiner will introduce themselves to you, and they'll ask you to introduce yourself by confirming your identity through number of questions, but you can usually expect to be asked about 4 or 5 depending on the length of your answers. And with regards to the length, there is no need to create extended, developed answers here. This section, you should use this section to help you relax into the talk. Imagine you're talking to a friend and just talk naturally like that. If you were talking to a friend, you wouldn't just say yes, no, yes, no. Same thing here. Don't just give yes or no answers, but at the same time, you wouldn't give essay length answers. So nice natural, maybe 1 or 2 sentences to each of the questions asked. Let's have a look at some examples. What is your job? Do you like your job? What do you study? Is it a popular subject? How do you spend your free time? You will be given 1 minute to prepare and make notes to help you in your talk, and then you will be told when that 1 minute has passed. After that, you'll be asked to perform your talk for 1 to 2 minutes. This is going to be the final lecture in this section. And in this lecture, we're going to be talking about how the speaking exam is marked by the examiners. You can actually find this out for yourself online. It's not like a hidden secret. If you go to Google and you search for IELTS speaking band descriptors, you will see this for yourself. But the band descriptors can be a little bit confusing and inaccessible to some people. So the idea of this lecture is to break everything down and make in terms of your speaking. And those 4 things are your fluency and coherence, your lexical resource, which is your vocabulary, your grammatical range and accuracy, and your pronunciation. So let's break this down and look at each of these categories in turn, focusing in particular on how we can score a band 7. So fluency and coherence to begin with. According to the official band descriptors, which you will see online, to achieve band 7 and above, you must speak at length without noticeable effort or loss of coherence. You may demonstrate language-related hesitation or some repetition and/or self-correction. You must use a range of connectives and discourse markers with flexibility. If that looks a little bit foreign to you, then let's have a look at it in more basic language. You should speak for a long time without struggling to find the right words as you are doing so. Of course, if you're in part 1, as we talked about, you don't have to speak for too long, but just try to speak at length for a longish time without struggling and hesitating. So don't worry too much if you do occasionally hesitate, repeat words or correct yourself. This is permissible and you can still score a band 7 while doing it, but you should try to avoid it if you can. And finally, you should link your ideas with appropriate words and expressions, but try not to rely on the same expressions and words every time. I have a few students, for example, who are too dependent on the word so. I'm using it myself there, as you can see, but we want to try and use flexibility when we use these discourse markers. Moving and you must use paraphrase effectively. So what does this mean in basic terms? Well, you need to show that you can talk about a variety of different topics by using a range of If we think about grammar, in order to achieve a band 7 or above, you need to use a range of complex structures with some flexibility, and you need to frequently produce error-free sentences, though some grammatical mistakes may persist. This one seems pretty self-explanatory, but let's break it down. Do not speak in very simple sentences only, but do try to include more complex structures too. Try to avoid making too many grammar mistakes. But don't worry if you make a few over the course of the test. Please don't let that distract you if you notice that it happens. Do try to come back and self-correct, but don't let it throw you off your rhythm and your flow. Aim for a sentence accuracy rate of above 50%. If you do that, then we can say that the majority of your sentences are error-free. And finally, if we think about pronunciation, in order to achieve band 7 and above, you need to show all the positive features of band 6, but not all the positive features of band 8 necessarily. So we can't really rely on band 7 band descriptors here to highlight what we need to do. We need to think about what's involved in a 6 and an 8. One thing that is mentioned though for band 7 is that you need to use a wide range of pronunciation features with mixed control. Essentially, for band 6 you need to generally be understood, but for band 8 you need to be easy to understand throughout. Those are in the band descriptors. So if we think about this in basic terms, we can see that you need to make sure that all of the band 6 band descriptor criteria are met, but also meet a few of the band 8 band descriptor criteria. You need to show that you can pronounce words accurately. That means using both the correct stress and the appropriate sound for the vowel or the consonant you're trying to produce. You also need to make sure you're using appropriate intonation. Essentially, this all comes down to making sure that you can be easily and you can test this by perhaps speaking to a native speaker, then you really need to be working on improving your pronunciation. So let's have a quick roundup here. The 4 band descriptor categories. What are they? Fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation. So what are the criteria for achieving a band 7 in each of these categories? Well, for fluency and coherence, you need to speak clearly at length, use a range of connecting expressions, use discourse markers, and you need to try to avoid hesitation, but don't worry too much about it because you can hesitate a bit. In terms of lexical resource, to score a band 7, you need to use vocabulary to discuss a variety of different topics and be comfortable talking about different topics. Use less common vocabulary and try to use a few idioms as well. Show style and use collocations. Both simple and complex. Don't rely too much on these simple sentences. Don't make too many grammatical mistakes, but don't worry if you make a few. You are allowed to make a few mistakes, but you should aim for a minimum of 50% sentence accuracy. And for pronunciation, try to show control over a range of different pronunciation features, different sounds for different consonants and vowels. Effectively use intonation and stress of the sections, which each reflect a different part of the speaking test, will be broken into 4 lectures, each one focusing on a different criterion of each of the band descriptor categories. So let's get started on that journey by moving now into section 2, focusing on part 1 of the speaking test, and I will see